from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, Mickey is so used to this now that she immediately departs, relegating the floor to Aurora to keep on kissing me. Well, today we have some weighty matters to discuss. To those of you who are interested in fact, to those of you who are interested in fiction or opinion, I'm afraid it's not going to go down quite so well. And may I also say that I am going to start with a correction, and then we're going to have some fun before we plunge into the really serious stuff, because these are really very momentous times. And sometimes you can't ignore what's going on in the world. I mean, we can have fun, but we also, I think, sometimes need to be a little bit more serious. So if you will bear with me, we will do both. And who wants to skip the serious stuff, please feel free to do so. Okay? The first thing is a correction from Shelly Belly, who says, and she's one of many, "Hi, Lady C. Holly was a presenter on This Morning, not Good Morning Britain." Thanks, Shelly Belly and everybody else for that correction. I confused the two programs, sorry. Quite frankly, I think they're both of equal insignificance, and that's partly why I don't remember. I think I can't be bothered to remember. But yes, I stand corrected. Holly Willoughby was a presenter on This Morning. And now Carol B says, and here we come to the fun stuff, "What partners and organizations do the duo have in Israel, and how exactly are they supporting them to provide urgent aid? Did they send them dollars?" I can't believe that question. "Or medical supplies? Heat-seeking missiles?" I would like for you, as a reporter, to ask them exactly how they are giving support, instead of posting their word salad message for the world to hear. Thank you. The more you release and report on their press releases, the more you keep them in the news, instead of focusing on the active, hard-working members of the actual royal family. Well, Carol B., I stand corrected. However, I think it does not behoove the royal family or any monarchist to ignore what they are up to, because then their fictions will be converted into fact. So I actually think I have a valid reason to challenge their claims. So, also, I'm not a reporter, just for what it's worth. I'm not a reporter. Okay? Well, I actually understand that Harry and Meghan are sending Range Rovers, packed lunches from Fortnum and Mason. Meghan is sending push-up bras, after all. A girl needs what a girl needs at all times, especially when she's in danger of being missiled. What else are they sending? Claptrap. Of course they're not sending anything. It's really offensive that they would have said that they have links to the front line. Excuse me. This atrocity was committed at a music festival. That was the front line. Are Harry and Meghan seriously claiming that they had contacts on the ground at that front line? Because that's what the ordinary meaning of their words would be. I mean, and they're going to support partners and organizations on the front lines in Israel. What partners do Harry and Meghan have in Israel? And what organizations are they partnered with? You know, when people will use a genuine atrocity, such as has taken place, which should revolt everybody, and they are so eager for attention that they jump on that bandwagon. I mean, how distasteful is that? When you stop to think some of the things that have happened to some of those innocent people, how can they have inserted themselves into this narrative? I'll tell you why they have done it, in case you don't know, which I'm sure everybody does, but I'm still going to hammer the nail. They have inserted themselves because Harry and Meghan, in their delusional state, actually think that they have the stature of a state. William and Charles have made a comment, as indeed most heads of state or heirs in line will have made in some way, shape, or form. Because that is what states do. They commiserate with each other. Their representatives commiserate with each other about tragedies that have occurred in the state. Harry and Meghan have no status, no stature in terms of being a state. The only state they have stature in is the state of insanity. Yes, I meant what I said, because it is absolute insanity to try to act as if they are of such consequence that they can now do and send messages of sympathy as if they were heads of state or in line to be a head of state, which so far they're not. Outrageous, absolutely outrageous. And it shows there is no barrel so deep that they won't scrape that low. I mean, honestly, to actually insert themselves into such a dreadful situation and come up with these preposterous claims that they have support partners and organizations on the front line in Israel, on the front lines, in Israel. You see, in their insane view of things, they are so consequential, they are so grand, they are so important that their words have the gravitas of the words of a head of state. You talk about empty vessels making the most noise. Non nobis says, Lady C, I love your devotion to telling the truth, whatever the cost. Thank you. Do you agree that if a Muslim Middle Eastern billionaire, especially a princely one, was interested in megalomaniac, she'd see it as an opportunity to emulate Diana yet again. Well, what do you think? I think you know what I think. Diana Mac too. Oh, those yachts, those private planes. Oh, never having to fly commercial anymore. Oh, just give me a fabulous, dusky billionaire. Oh. And an ocean-going yacht with 4 decks and a helipad and a Gulfstream 4 so I don't have to fly commercial anymore. Please. I'm going to love you so much. I am. After all, this one has not lived up to his promise of giving me everything I want. And remember, he's the one who said, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets. And I've not been getting it. No, I've not been getting it. It's so awful. I've not been getting, but I've slimmed down really well. So that somebody who thinks that nearer the bone, the sweeter the meat, will know what this is all about. Yeah. What do you think? That's what I think. Baron Mulberry says, after hearing you briefly touch on the war in Israel, that, I would imagine, is an allusion to when I was on GB News, I decided not to reply as it's generally not a political channel. Then, when I recalled how students at UCLA, a rather prominent university, proposed a pro-Israel versus pro-Hamas debate, I reconsidered. There were close to 200 students who offered to argue Hamas's side and zilch, zero, nada students willing to argue Israel's corner. Well, they certainly wouldn't have made good barristers because you're supposed to argue any brief that's put in front of you convincingly. So I thought that's what debating was all about. So let me continue. I believe this to be a result of intense intimidation and indoctrination by virtually all faculty and university administrators across the West. It also has to do with conservatives and centrists being systematically excluded from faculty positions and basically banned from being granted tenure. I've very grave doubts any civilization will endure which has huge majorities of college students and elites unable to differentiate between standards of civilization on one hand and brutal, barbaric crimes against humanity on the other. This war is not political. Even aside from considerations of wartime crimes, Hamas has issued no more or less realistic demands of Israel for a ceasefire. This would be absolutely key for it to be considered even partially political. It strikes me that I've never seen anyone, male or female, half as brave as you. Thank you very much, but I'm not sure that's so. Anyway, I'm sorry, you're not mixing with very brave people. I don't doubt your courage for a moment, and no, you're no anti-Semite. Well, I can't be. A whole load of my makeup is Semitic. To my way of thinking, broadly similar situations ought to have broadly similar reactions. When blacks or gays are violently attacked, unlike in past eras, These days, everyone speaks with one voice to loudly denounce this. Still, you're not wrong. There are real complexities to this, and I would not presume to advise you. I simply state I find it deeply distressing such a terribly courageous person as yourself should find it necessary or expedient to remain silent. And I'm going to read the next one as well, and then I'm going to answer the whole shebang in one. Peace Lover says, Lady C, I saw you last night on GB News discussing the King and Prince William's use of the word terrorist, and am aware that you are a member of the eminent Ziadi family, who have a long history of supporting democracy, secular government in the Middle East, and Israel. Many of us are admirers of Archbishop Ziadi and the other members of your family, such as Louis Ziadi, who took part in the Edey coup to preserve Lebanon from becoming a theocratic state along the lines of Iran. I was surprised to read some of the comments, presumably on GB News, which seemed to misunderstand what you were saying, and wonder if you could give us the benefit of the sane and reasoned, may I say life-enhancing, points of view which you're becoming so well known for. Thank you very much, but let's not get me too swell-headed. If anyone can cut through the tangled undergrowth of the Middle East, it's you. Oh gosh, really, big head. Not only because of your heritage, but also your humane and commonsensical approach, being the common sense being the rarest commodity in the world. Hence the mess the world is always in. I'm sorry for laughing. That is really very complimentary and rather sweetly done. Very flattering, maybe too flattering. Well, I have to say, the Middle Eastern conflict, which has been ongoing since before my birth, and I am now 74 years old. In fact, Israel signed up to one of the United Nations declarations on my birthday, the 17th of August, 1949. But we'll get to that in a moment. The situation is so layered, so murky, conflicting self-interests. The ruling classes, I have to tell you, don't speak the truth and don't want the public to know the truth. And that's the fact. There is one face presented to the public and another behind closed doors, that where the reality exists that is presented. Why? Because of self-interest. Many of the states involved have interests that conflict with their public stances. And if the citizens of their countries actually knew to what extent these conflicts existed, there would be a hue and cry the like of which you would not imagine. That's one reason. Another reason is that because of these conflicting self-interests, where sometimes what the public thinks is an adversary or an enemy is actually secretly a friend, and vice versa, incidentally. the whole thing is so murky. Then you get into not the interrelations between the various states, but the constituent parts of each state. And I mean, Lebanon, for instance, the average sophisticated, educated, secular Middle Easterner, irrespective of the country in which he or she is a citizen, basically accepts that Israel is here to stay, and that in an ideal world it would be good to have the whole Middle Eastern conflict cleaned up. But as far as they are concerned, most of them are very cynical and think, just not right now, because whoever we are who is speaking at this any given moment, it is, but we have too much to lose at this point. I will use Lebanon as an example. Hezbollah is a huge problem within the Lebanese state. They occupy valuable land in Beirut that it's not possible to shift them from. The Muslim Lebanese would like to be rid of them. The Christian Lebanese would like to be rid of them. The Druze Lebanese would like to be rid of them. The Jewish Lebanese would like to be rid of them. And doubtless the atheistic Lebanese would like to be rid of them. But because of the whole problem in the Middle East, they can't get rid of them. I just use that as a small example of how layered the situation is in Lebanon. I'll use another small example, Jordan. Now, Jordan is a very reputable, stable, westernized state. But if the situation were resolved tomorrow, Jordan would have a huge problem. Which of its lands and people would it be willing to surrender? So the status quo suits each of the participants. Israel, it suits Israel as well. They'd have to give back the Golan Heights. They don't want to give back the Golan Heights because Israel has a chronic problem with water. The Golan Heights has water. Israel needs water. So those are three small examples of why the ongoing chaos actually is, I have to say, I would be very surprised if in my lifetime the situation is sorted out. I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe not even in my children's lifetime. Ultimately, I think it will be sorted out. It will be sorted out when the major powers no longer have vested interests in perpetuating the chaos. At the moment, and for practically the whole of the last century, they have had vested interests in perpetuating, first of all, the system and then the chaos that resulted from Western interference that has created havoc. There is no solution possible by war except termination. Therefore, the solution has to be peacefully. It has to be harmony. Peace and harmony have to be arrived at However, as I hope I just made clear, there are so many vested interests in perpetuating the conflict that it's not likely. Then, of course, you have the people who genuinely believe that the conflict is a righteous conflict. You have on both sides of the divide people who believe in the rightness of their stance. They will ultimately, when peace arrives, they, I think, would be disappointed to not have absolute victory, but they would be, I would hope, willing to achieve harmony with adjustment, which most people in the Middle East accept, that ultimately the answer is a two-party state, or a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. So two states, or a two-party state. That will take some doing. Let us see what happens. I personally always think peace is preferable to war. You know, I'm going to just run you through a few facts. So, because the whole Middle Eastern situation is layered with passion and emotion, and not always factual appreciation. Israel exists as a result of a United Nations resolution 181 it was called the Petition resolution, which was adopted on the 29th of November 1947 for the creation of the State of Israel, which would divide Great Britain's former mandate of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state in May 1948, when the British mandate was scheduled to come to an end. Had there been no Holocaust, there would doubtless have been no State of Israel. But the Western powers, who knew about the extermination of the Jews from 1941, when it all started, and by 1942, when it kicked off in a big way, they certainly knew. I have written about this previously. Because remember, my great-grandmother was a Jewess. She was born a Jewess. She became a Christian, but that was my mother's mother's mother. So had Hitler prevailed, they would have been exterminated and I wouldn't exist, because they would have fallen foul of the Nuremberg laws. Aside from the fact that the West, the Allies, decided that they were going to compensate for their sins of omission, and I say sins of omission because in my opinion they were sins as well as sins of omission, by not coming to the rescue of the Jews before the beginning of the Second World War, when Britain, America, etc. callously refused to allow fleeing Jews from Nazi Germany into their countries. So they had a guilty conscience. But did they give away New York or London? No, they didn't. They gave away Palestine. I mean, you couldn't make this up. They gave away Palestine on the basis of the fact that the Balfour Declaration, which took place during the First World War, when Palestine was an Ottoman territory, and Balfour and Lord Rothschild knocked heads together and decided that the way to undermine the Central Powers, which were the enemy in the First World War, as well as bring in Jews who were in neutral states, because Jewry is international and Jews by and large are successful, and they wanted the support of the Jews. So they came up with the Balfour Declaration, which would promise the Jews a homeland in Palestine. But that Balfour Declaration actually, although giving a right to Jews to have a homeland in Palestine, it also secured the rights of all of the other occupants of Palestine. So there was no question of any Palestinian losing his or her home, shop, ranch, orange grove, whatever. The whole arrangement was ratified in the Sykes-Picot-Suzanov Agreement of 1916, where Sir Mark Sykes, grandfather of my late friend, Monsieur Picot, who represented the French Empire, because France, although it was a republic, still had an empire. So there was the British Empire, there was the French Empire, there was the Russian Empire. Suzanov was the foreign minister of Russia, Imperial Russia, and the Kingdom of Italy assented to it as well. Because the Kingdom of Italy in the First World War was one of our allies. To divide up the Middle East in a three-way split, well, Italy was going to get some stuff and did, because Italy was basically allowed Libya, and Russia got nothing because the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, and Britain and France took the whole shebang, basically. They betrayed all their Middle Eastern allies. They had promised X to this one, Y to that one, Z to the other one. I've been through this before, and I don't want to go through it because it's going to bog down things too much. But they promised the sky to all of the Middle Eastern rulers to rebel against the Ottomans, and when they did, they then backtracked on their agreements to keep hold of the oil and the rich farmlands. I think you can say it was a betrayal, to put it bluntly. That is the bedrock upon which this crisis was created. Second World War, there is the tragedy of what happened to the Jewish people in Europe. And as I said, the Allies knew about it and did nothing. Nothing. Their rationale was they didn't want the Germans knowing that they knew. Unbelievable, I know, but that was their excuse or reason, whichever you wish to regard it as being. So then, Palestine is given away partly to the people who suffered as a result of Western negligence. And who suffers? Because have you noticed, in May 1948 there was supposed to be the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. There is only the state of Israel. Now, to those of you who are familiar with me and my family, you will know that my family has been systematically pro-secular, and therefore, to a large extent, they have taken the view that we should get along with Israel. So, aside from the fact that I'm part Jewish, my family, as a family, cannot be deemed to be anti-Israeli. You only need to look at the destruction that was wrought to the Ziadi Palace in Beirut in the 1970s to know that it is not possible for my family to be accused of being anti-Israeli, because my father's great uncle, Archbishop Ziadi, Uncle Ignatius, as he's supposed to be known within the family, was the Archbishop, Maronite Archbishop of Beirut. And he was a firm supporter of Sharon, and he has been partly held liable for the massacre of the Palestinians in the refugee camps of Shatila and Sabra. So I think with a family history like that, it's not feasible that anybody in their right mind could say that I or any member of my family would be anti-Israeli. I just make that point for what it's worth, because people are capable of coming up with any bit of rubbish that they think is going to make them get their jollies off as they hurl invective and abuse without even being reasonable or sensible. Well, I want to make a point at this point, because I have been told that there is tremendous dissatisfaction in certain quarters in Israel as a result of what has happened at that music festival, with Hamas being able, I'm choosing my words carefully, to launch such an effective attack. I am told that in certain quarters in Israel, there is the view that Mossad was lent on to allow the attack, to assist Israel's main ally, so that any domestic political troubles could be possibly wished away, and if American Jews think that they and their brethren in Israel are under attack, and it also ratchets up the anti-Semitism worldwide and opens Jews all over the world to heightened chances of attack, that this plays very well with certain politicians in foreign parts. I'm not going to say any more than that. Sorry, I don't want to say more than that. Well, how realistic is that? How fanciful? Because I said, well, surely there is the argument to be run that Mossad might have neglected. They said absolutely not a chance. Mossad is far too effective. It's never happened before, and it won't happen again. I was told this is the Israeli equivalent of Pearl Harbor, which of course Roosevelt is supposed to have known about the impending attack on Pearl Harbor and kept the Japanese ambassador waiting for, I think it was 36 hours to serve the declaration of war, so that they could then spin around and say, oh, the Japanese attacked us without declaring war. How true that is, I don't know. But I impart that little bit of information for what it's worth, because this is what I was told. And it's certainly in high politics, things are not always as pedestrians might think they are. Let me put it that way. And there, especially in a democracy, and especially with elections coming up, there is often the view, well, we will make a little sacrifice so that bigger interests are preserved. And evidently, according to what I was told, there is a quarter in Israel that believes that Mossad was lent on to allow this to happen. And if that is the case, it is both parties who are guilty of crimes against humanity. Both, or shall I say all three parties, the leaner, the lent upon, and the attacker. Because make no mistake about it, this is a crime against humanity. You know, in 1948, on the 10th of December, there was a Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris. It was an outgrowth of the Holocaust, and as some of you will recall, there had been the Nuremberg trials, etc., which we're not going to go into. As a result of that, there was the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, called the Genocide Convention in everyday parlance, which is an international treaty that criminalizes genocide and obliges states, parties, etc., to pursue the enforcement of its prohibition. Israel, for obvious reasons, because Israel was a virginal state with the full support of the United Nations and the Western powers, all the Western powers at that time, Israel signed the declaration on the 17th of August 1949, my birthday, and it ratified it on the 9th of March 1950. When did the United Kingdom accede to this convention? Wait for it. The 30th of March 1970. That's after the 6 Days War. And the United States of America? That's even more surprising. They signed on the 11th of December 1948 and they only ratified on the 25th of November 1988. 1988. Do you begin to see that there is a lot more to this than meets the eye? You know, there's been a big kerfuffle about the fact that the King and the Prince of Wales used the word terrorist to describe what has happened with Hamas. And there is no doubt that it is a terrorist act. It's also a genocidal act. It is also a crime against humanity. These two are far more serious than terrorist. I mean, everybody's getting so excited about the fact that they use the word terrorist and that the BBC is refusing to call Hamas a terrorist organization. And now, those of you who know me will know that I have no brief for the BBC. But I have to say, in this instance, the BBC is absolutely correct. And I'm going to tell you why they are correct. And I'm going to use 3 Israeli prime ministers as the demonstration of why the BBC is correct. The BBC takes the view that Hamas, which is a political organization which governs, it is the democratic government of Gaza. It is the democratically elected government of the state of Palestine, as has been recognized by, I think, about 2/3 of the United Nations. So although many countries don't recognize the state of Palestine, others do. And let's go back to 1948, when the United Nations article said a state of Palestine and a state of Israel. So we need to keep all of that in mind, because either there is a rule of law and either there is right and wrong, or there is no rule of law, there's no right and wrong, and depending on who it is, they're allowed to do it. And if you don't like them, they're not allowed to do it. So I just make those points for what it's worth, because the reason why the BBC will not call Hamas a terrorist organization is because Hamas is a democratically elected government. And also, Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, a former Defense Minister of Israel, the former Military Intelligence Chief of Israel, has himself indicated that he would have joined one of those organizations had he been a Palestinian. And I'm going to quote exactly what he said in an interview he gave in 1998. If I was a Palestinian at the right age, at some stage, I would have entered one of the terror organizations and have fought from there, and later certainly have tried to influence from within the political system. Do you know why he said that? Aside from the fact that he was speaking the truth and was decent enough to actually come clean, because two other prime ministers of Israel have been accused of being terrorists and of being members of terrorist gangs. Now, so the BBC is taking the view, as has often been said, today's terrorist is tomorrow's freedom fighter. So the BBC is taking the view, let's be neutral. And in this respect, I think they are correct, because you have Menachem Begin, who was, I think he was the sixth prime minister of Israel. He was one of the founders, I think he was a leader of the Irgun, which was a terrorist organization that fought for Israel's establishment. He was covered in honors, including by the very countries that are now trying to say that it's awful that Hamas is not being called terrorist. These same countries called Irgun terrorists. Then there was Lehi, the Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, led by Yitzhak Shamir, another former prime minister of Israel. You know, Israeli politicians understand, not that they're going to say it publicly, but I'm telling you, I know this privately, that they understand that they have to deal with the elected government of the Palestinians, and that is Hamas. What they say publicly and what they say privately are two different things. On all sides, there's a heightened awareness of how public perceptions can work in their favor. So a whole load of propagandizing goes on, where the rhetoric is condemnatory publicly for them to have the advantage in winning the hearts and minds of the public, while privately they take a far more measured view and a far less rhetoric. There's far less rhetoric. There's no preachifying, and there's no speechifying. There's let's get down to the nitty-gritty and see how we can get this to work. The one politician who I would say actually is disinclined to do that is Netanyahu. And there are loads of people in Israel and outside of Israel who would like to see the back of him, because they think he aggravates problems rather than solves them. And they're not so complimentary about his motives for aggravating problems either. They think he's great at aggravating problems for his political and personal gain. Now, I'm going to touch very briefly on my family history. My father's family went from Lebanon at the turn of the last century to Jamaica. I've had cousins who were senators in Jamaica, etc., etc. So, but in Lebanon, we were primarily an intellectual and religious family. And my father's branch of the family, the Schweifert branch, as opposed to the Kessewan branch, which would have been Archbishop Ziadi's branch of the family. My father's branch of the family actually became Greek Orthodox, which was more neutral. The Maronites were very much more keepers of the Lebanese flame and heritage. But my father's family were moral as opposed to political. Whenever they took a political stand, it was usually on moral grounds, whatever country they were in. And they tried to be good public servants. Now, because they were Christian in Lebanon, they have taken the secular side of things. And in Lebanon, people don't realize it. There is a huge divide between those who want a secular state, and the Lebanese constitution was created to have a balanced secular state, which still exists by the skin of its teeth, although the Syrians have been desperate to gobble up Lebanon for the last 30 years. The Muslims in Lebanon, who are middle class and upper class and well off, are secular. The religious fundamentalist Muslims are theocratic. And the fight in Lebanon is between theocracy and secularism. To an extent, that is also, ironically enough, a struggle in Israel, except the secularites are streets ahead of the theocracies, because the theocrates are, for instance, the Hasidics, who actually don't even believe in a state of Lebanon, of Israel, ironically enough. So anyway, that's my family from Lebanon, and we were part Russian and part Lebanese, and very much in the interests of the Orthodox faith. And in Jamaica, because there was no Orthodox church, my father's family reverted back to its original Catholicism, because Maronites are Catholic. And one or two cousins became Anglican, but most of them remained Catholic. And my mother's family is part Jewish. My mother's mother was half Jewish, quarter French, quarter Irish. But so there has been an awareness of that my mother's family survived by the skin of their teeth, let me put it that way. I suppose I can end by saying that a little bit about Palestine, because, you know, there are serious crimes that have been occurring in all of the Israeli and Palestinian territories for many decades. there are crimes against humanity on both sides of the divide. Ethnic cleansing is a word that is being bandied about at the moment because the Israeli government has decreed that 1.1 million civilians are to leave Gaza within 24 hours, according to them, for their own protection. But, you know, these are diktats that go against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, and that also go against the Genocide Convention. And no state is, according to the conventions and that Israel itself has signed, is actually entitled to tell 1.1 million people, you have to move out of your home within 24 hours because we are going to effectively, possibly raze your home to the ground. This is also one of the reasons why many people, me included, hesitated to endorse the King and the Prince of Wales using the word terrorist in connection with Hamas, because once you use it in connection with one party who is clearly breaching rules and regulations, you are obliged, if you are being even-handed, to use it when the other party breaches rules and regulations. Now, Ehud Barak has been on television, I think it was yesterday, and made it absolutely clear. He said there is no existential threat to Israel. Therefore, the Israeli government, just as how Hamas has certainly overreached, to put it very mildly and politely, in committing the atrocity it did, because there is no excuse for what Hamas did. To attack innocent people, civilians, it's a crime against humanity. There are no two ways about it. But for the Israeli government to respond in a way that its critics can say is so disproportionate, 1,000 versus 1,000,000, you begin to see why. And also, those of us who want peace and want harmony to ultimately be achieved understand that emotive language does no good. You know, in the mid-80s, I was one of the founder members of the International Organization for a Just Peace in the Middle East. It was conceived as a pressure group that would, behind the scenes, try to advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. Really, a two-party solution where Israel's existence was protected and the Palestinians were given the right to the state that, or an approximation of the state that, or at least a version of the state that the UN had given them for May 1948. I'll tell you, it was an absolute shock to discover how disinterested people you thought would be interested were. I remember when we approached Emanuel Jakobowitz, who was the chief rabbi at the time, he was so offensive about the rights of the Palestinians. It was beyond belief. I mean, that's one of the things that made us realize that, we were flogging a dead horse. Another that made us realize it really was not going to work was nobody, with very few exceptions, the Americans, listened to what we had to say. The papacy listened to what we had to say. The PLO listened to what we had to say. Do you think many of the other Middle Eastern countries wanted to hear a word? Not a bit of it. And the Americans made it quite clear to us that unless it was in their interest and their allies' interest, we could whistle in the dark. And so finally we decided it's too big a nut for us to crack. And so we folded the organization. But it had started with high hopes that people would actually want a solution. And that's really my introduction to the fact that most of the parties involved don't want a solution at this time. And certainly, if what I have been told coming out of Israel, that certain people in the upper reaches of the government and Mossad feel that they have actually been sold down the river in this instance, and that then you really know a very cynical operators are at play. I just say all of that for what it's worth. I would like to see a solution. I would like to see Israel protected and Palestine protected and international agreements be put in place. And as I said before, practically all of the, shall we say, effective and reputable Middle Eastern states actually, at the end of the day, understand they need to accept and are willing to accept, and in fact want to accept, the existence of Israel. And I'll tell you why they won't accept the existence of Israel. Because Israel provides a counterbalance. And as long as Israel exists, they feel their interests are being protected, even when they're adversaries of Israel. I mean, you talk about complicated. Nothing is straightforward. But I doubt very much that in my lifetime, there is going to be a peaceful solution. I hope there is, but I don't expect. And I hope that answers the question. And beyond that, I really would prefer not to speak about this conflict. I have cousins on both sides of the divide because, like many Lebanese families, I have Jewish cousins, I have Druze cousins. I don't think I have any Muslim cousins, but I certainly have many Muslim friends, and we are all as one. We are all in accord. We would like to see peace and harmony. But the corruption, the cynicism, the greed, and the ambition that is prevalent. I mean, if you really knew to what extent it is existent, you would know we need to pray. We need to pray. And I have to say, it is my considered opinion that this problem will only be solved when there is no incentive for the major powers to have their oar in that sea. Let me put it that way. And at the moment, I fear there's much too much of an incentive. And you know, the tragedy of this whole situation is that from AD 70, after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem and had control of the Great Jewish Revolt of 66 to, I think, 73 AD, which finally ended with Mossad, but by 69, the Romans had most of, I think it was Judea, under control. There was a rebellion as a result of Nero wanting to force the Jews to actually pay tribute as a result of his demands that he was a god and that they should actually acknowledge that, which of course they were never going to do because the Jewish religion there is but one God, Yahweh, who is God. It's just the name for God. And he sent Vespasian, who was at the time a very low-key general, very successful, who actually sorted out to a large extent the rebellion. And by the time he sorted it out in 69 AD, Nero had been assassinated. And this was the year of the 4 emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and then Vespasian, who was recalled to Rome, and his son Titus took over. And they ultimately razed the Second Temple in Jerusalem to the ground. And with the exception of Mossad, which had been 2 palaces and a fortification built on the hill of Mossad by Herod the Great, where the fanatics actually took refuge, and it took another 3 years, if I remember correctly, for them to be finally annihilated. The Jews were given hospitality by their neighbors, including what in the Bible they call the Philistines. Now, Philistine is a word that is derived from the Greek Philistia. And everybody knows about the Philistines who's a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, because, of course, the Old Testament and the New Testament are also holy books in the Muslim religion. And really, for many years, for actually, you could say for hundreds of years, the Palestinians, as they ultimately became known, the Philistines, they occupied 5 city-states around what is the modern Tel Aviv, Yaffo, and Gaza. Now, Gaza has never been anything but Palestinian. And I think if we pushed our luck, we might discover that Tel Aviv was borderline. But it was only after the Jewish revolt that Judea ceased to exist, and the temple at Jerusalem was razed, and Jerusalem actually had its name changed. Jerusalem ceased to exist, and the Romans renamed it Aelia Capitolina, and they built it on the ruins of Jerusalem, and they built a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount. And that became the catalyst for another Jewish revolt in 132 AD, when the Jews were finally totally run out of the area. Well, the Jews, after AD 70, and even more so after 132 AD, they were granted refuge in all of the surrounding territories, including Palestine, because it's been known in one way or the other as Palestine, or a variation of that, since biblical times. The Romans renamed it Syria Palestina, but Syria and Palestina were actually 2 separately administered entities. So you really had Syria and you had Palestina, which actually got an upgrade in terms of the rank of the army officer who was going to be governing it. And it's ironic that from AD 70, and certainly after AD 312, till 1948, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims of Palestine lived in absolute harmony. That is something that people need to take on board as well. And I would like to see a restoration of that harmony in my lifetime. Not that I am going to be holding my breath, because I suspect it's not going to happen. I would love it to, but I'm not sure it will happen. I hope this has been of interest to you. I'm not going to take any questions on this subject, incidentally, and I hope to not have to address it again. I think it is too big a subject for debate. I'm not interested in debating it. If a solution can't be made, and concrete assistance given, I really see no merit beyond sharing my knowledge with you in this instance, and hereafter I think I will, if you don't mind, avoid the subject altogether. Peace, peace, peace. That's what we should be aiming for. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in. However, not on this subject, on anything else. Thank you very much. Okay, I hope this has been of some interest to you. And I hope you understand the complexity and the nuances and the enormity and the dreadfulness of it all. Because it is a terrible position for the Israelis to be in, and it's a terrible position for the Palestinians to be in as well. Make no mistake about it. Both those peoples suffer as a result of what is happening and has been allowed to continue to happen for the decades that it has been ongoing. Thank you so much. God bless. Goodbye. And if you have enjoyed this, if enjoy is the word to use, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and Godspeed.